It's been a while, but I made another analysis video. This time we take a closer look at Clair de Lune from Claude Debussy. The purpose with this video is to emphasize some very striking compositional ideas present in this well-known and beautiful standard piano work. This to provide the eager student or composer with some fresh ideas, or just to sprout inspiration in general. In addition, I think this could also be beneficial for those who are performing this work. There will be plenty of information on harmonic functions and form as well, just to get a more complete picture of the composition. So I recently decided to take life a bit more seriously and gain a bit of independence as a composer and online music teacher. Making these analysis videos costs a lot of hours and effort. I strongly believe in free education accessible by anyone who wants so. For that reason, I'll continue to make this stuff freely available. But if you want to support me, you can always contact me or use Patreon. I can also give you advice, private lessons, etc. I'll give some links in the description if you're interested. I'm not that kind of person who wants to spam you with ads or annoying sponsorships, so you will be spared from that. Let's get back to Clair de Lune. Debussy wrote this piece as the third movement of his Suite Bergamesque in 1895 and revised it in 1905. Clair de Lune itself is inspired by the Paul Verlaine poem. The work contains a lot of original ideas and beautiful balanced coherent writing. It's a true classic that touches a wide audience because of its universal appeal and accessibility. Yet I would argue it has a complex harmonic, quote-unquote, impressionistic framework. In the first chapter of this analysis, we'll listen to a recording performed by Simon Renzi and follow along the score where I have indicated the harmonic functions. The structure can loosely be categorized under ternary form or ABA form, which I also indicate on top of the score in the grey bar. If you want to skip to chapter 2, if you already know the piece by heart, you can use the timestamps. In the second chapter we go over the sections separately and highlight Debussy's approach in the techniques in detail. After each part, you can listen to it once more to spot these ideas for yourself, or you can just skip ahead to the next one. I want to thank EMSLP for providing the score and MuseOpen together with Simon Renzi for the recording. These are not sponsors, just happy these platforms and people exist and make life easier. Remember, an analysis is just one way of looking at something. It can never replace or fully represent a composer's initial ideas or mindset. We start with section A. A quick glance at the first few bars shows a high register, syncopations, and an unusual rhythm for that era. It looks intimate and quasi-improvisando, certainly something Debussy must have had in mind. The dynamics are soft and expressive. Even the key is ambiguous. First impression is F minor, but the root is given later in the soprano voice. We thus have a first inversion of the D flat major chord. The notes in this green box form the main motive of the piece, which will return at various occasions. Notice that the first time we have a syncopation before the motive. This is the second motive, double changing notes, again with a syncopation before. These two form a small descending sequence that will be continued and elaborated in the next slide. The second motive is now elaborated and continued in a descending sequence. The bass accompaniment follows in a descending lamenting fashion with the introduction of the new bass accents on the third beat of each measure. As you can see, there is little direction in these chords. We see second scale degree chords as well as dominants and sixth degrees, no sign of a tonic yet. This fits and defines the wandering and non-definitive character once again. The descending sequence continues, followed by a dominant and tonic to restate the first theme. This time without syncopation, in contrast to the introduction on the first bar of this piece. Second motive is still present. The restatement is not just a mere copy of the first bars. The accompaniment and lead is richer because of the denser writing. Chords differ as well, but the most important difference is that Debussy starts using octaves. He could not give them away in the beginning because they would lose their effect. It's sometimes better to start with less to get to more. In the next passage, the dense writing continues as well as the use of the second motive. The bass rises as well as the volume, just a little bit. Another common thread in this composition is the use of tertulations. Here, in the second measure, Debussy gives a secondary dominant, the dominant of G flat major, namely the D flat major dominant 7th chord, although in second inversion, with the A flat in the bass. Usually, this is followed by the G flat major chord itself, the 4th scale degree. Instead, we get B flat minor, the 6th scale degree. This will happen a few more times in this work. In fact, it works quite well because of the tertulation between the 4th and the 6th scale degree. That is, these chords are only a third apart and have a lot of tones in common. The notes indicated in the red boxes are suspensions that move and are placed in a similar way, of which the latter two are doubled in the octave. Now, a brief conclusion to these first 4 systems. 1. There is a lot of improvisational character and rhythmic ambiguity, yet 2 motives keep it all together. Second conclusion. The harmony does not modulate a lot, but is very suggestive, light and non-definitive. Also, there are very few root positioned chords and clear cadences. Debussy continues the rhythmic ambiguity by commanding tempo rubato linked to the duplet rhythm from before. Although this passage does not resemble the first 4 slides, there is still that second motive that keeps everything together, highlighted in the green boxes. Another common factor with the previous passage is the recurring suspension as well as the continuation of the downward motion in the soprano. Harmonically, we have something different going on with a pedal point on scale degree 2 in a very wide register. There are a lot of coloring notes in this pedal point, namely 9s and 13s, but they all resolve. It contains a mini cadence indicated with a red arrow, that is B flat to E flat, just a subtle relation to keep the momentum. Motive once again, and surprise surprise, yet another rhythm, a sextuplet, still in tempo rubato. We have 3 different rhythms in one slide now. Debussy now starts a sequence that builds up. A few things that you should notice in this build-up is this interval that will grow larger in the next measures, also this dynamic indication and the rising octave bass. Tension continues to grow because of the rising volume and bass. The interval between the 2 notes in the green boxes grows as well. We reach the first climax and ending of section A with a quasi-plagal cadence in a very high opaque register. The harmony is very weak because of the lack of low tones. Low tones have a lot of upper harmonics that our ear can hear and relate a key to, but in a high register the upper harmonics are less clear and sound blurry to our ears. It could go in all directions from here. There are different ways to analyze this passage, but the one thing you should notice is the omnipresent A flat in all last 4 chords. This is not surprisingly the dominant of D flat major. The last chord somewhat contains a lower A flat note that gives a direction to our ears. We might get to the D flat major perhaps. Also notice that right after the first climax, Debussy commands a diminuendo to get away from the climactic feeling and introduce a new theme in a neutral way. This is how you can link sections, let harmony and dynamics act at the same time. We'll now listen to section A once again, without my indications, but with harmony still in place. In section B, at first glance, we already see a different setting than before. There is the presentation of the third theme with arpeggio accompaniment. On the third beat, we have a special chord that is related to the other chord with a leap of a third in the bass. Yet with notes as F flat and C flat, it has nothing to do with our current keyed center. It connects to a repetition on the third theme via mini A flat to D flat cadence indicated by the red arrow. The arpeggio accompaniment swells and moves freely while the third theme continues on top, with some echoes in the middle voice. Theme 3 is now repeated and harmonized with other chords that follow a descending bass and a kind of forbidden classical progression into 5-4-3 and in the next slide 2. This is parallelism as obvious as it gets. You'll find this in other compositions by Debussy as well. Scale degree 2 kind of gets a pedal point with the occasion of D natural that acts as a small changing note. The last chord is not an ordinary dominant, but an augmented dominant chord in which E flat is augmented to E natural that could move to F of the tonic D flat major. Again, this happens in a quite high register, which flattens out the harshness of the augmented fifth. The high register and crescendo continues with our familiar third theme in the first harmonic progression we had a few slides back. From now on, things will start to get more blurry, harmony-wise. The last chord, F flat major, is the equivalent of E major. In the next section, there will be no cadences or hints of a clear tonal center. I've seen several online analyses in which people try to fit in exotic church modes, which were of course a tool by Debussy. However, I choose to use the key of E major, as Debussy indicates on the score. It's not super important in what system you want to classify all these upcoming chords, only know that there is a lack of a clear tonal center, and this was Debussy's natural instinct to write the passage in that manner. Now we see a lively fast passage with 7 chords in a high register. The arpeggios just keep coming. This is a continuation which even goes higher into what I call the second climax of the piece. The climax comes to an end with the indicated dynamics and the long slur of descending thirds. The arpeggio transforms into a pedal point. To get back to D flat major and to start a transition to end the B section, Debussy uses the parallel minor key of E major, namely C sharp minor. We can view the 4th degree in C sharp minor as the 4th degree in C sharp major, but a Muldur variant. This is also commonly known as borrowed harmony. The chord is G flat major, and harmonically C sharp major and D flat major are just the same. The pedal point on the dominant is firmly established while Debussy introduces a melody in the middle voice, while the 3rd theme is still present in the upper voice. The pedal point continues and the bass notes start to move more freely again. The accompanying melody is moved to the lowest voice while the 3rd theme is still present in the upper voice. The free-flowing slur of accompaniment is now present in the middle voice. The dominant pedal has not moved to the tonic but continues on 2nd and 7th scale degrees. For the last time in this middle section, Debussy goes to a higher register, this time on scale degree 2, which is the last harmonic function of the B section. If we look at where this B section ends compared to the total composition length, we can roughly say that it ends in relation to the golden ratio. I've explained this in a previous video on Mozart's Eine kleine Nachtmusik. It's not a rule of thumb, but it's something you have to keep in mind as a composer, or at least be aware of when you're going through the rough structure of any work. Once again, listen to the B section while keeping in mind some of my remarks, or just head over to the last section. Deceiving the expectations once again, Debussy starts the A section with the 3rd scale degree instead of the tonic that we might have expected. The tempo is the same tempo primo and the dynamics are very soft, which are very suiting after the climax. What we get is the first motive, but the accompaniment is borrowed from the B section with all its arpeggios. On the 2nd and 3rd beat of each measure, the arpeggio is not present as the soprano speaks the melody. This pattern continues with the absence of any strong cadence. Changing tones and blurry rhythm is still important. The succession of chords becomes more dense, but the harmony is still atypical in the classical sense. Debussy ends this section with a cadence and strong bass note on the dominant 7th chord. We're finally in the real D flat major, where it all started. Even the dynamics are exactly the same as with the start. Here is another example of the 3rd relation. The secondary dominant of the subdominant does not move to the subdominant, but to the 6th scale degree. Then a rising sequence starts on strong chords, which builds tension. The dominant resolves to the meandering B section bass in the tonic, this time for the first time without any melody. I would suggest to call this the coda. On the 3rd beat we get a clean tonic and not the F flat major chord. It comes later, here, in which the bass also stops and the momentum comes to a halt. There is a short burst of melody as well. I found this to be a particularly striking moment in the whole work. It feels like a dream comes to an end in a moment of deep thought. This idea is repeated an octave higher to create some contrast. The tail of the melody is repeated in isolation and moves in a beautiful dominant with an augmented 5th. The augmented 5th F flat is enharmonically the same as E natural, which has the tendency to move to F natural, the 3rd of the tonic on D flat major. Home sweet home. I'm convinced that there is plenty more in this composition on which I could have elaborated. However, I have to keep it time contained and I hope you all respect that. Sometimes it's better to remember just a few takeaways than to overanalyze and get lost in all small details.